In 1840, Franz Liszt invented the piano recital. Under his fingers, the piano became both intimate confessional and instrument of theatre, compelling the attentions and emotions of an eager, expectant, and sometimes almost voyeuristic audience. Liszt was the father of several diverse pianistic traditions, but the experience of the public arena was common to all the virtuosi who followed him, whatever their different backgrounds. A large and enthusiastic public celebrated the diversity of virtuosi who followed Liszt, and particularly those who were trained in the conservatoires of Russia and Eastern Europe. Of all these, none was more controversial or inspired greater adulation than Jan Ignaz Paderewski. Born in Poland in 1860, Paderewski didn't study seriously until he was 24. His teacher, Leschetizky, doubted that he would ever make a career as a soloist. Yet despite a flawed technique and a musical taste which sometimes provoked criticism, audiences loved him. After the First World War, he briefly became Prime Minister of Poland, and in his late 70s he made his debut as a Hollywood movie star.
Myth about Paderewski, not myth, the fact about Paderewski was an extremely attractive man and who had every woman in the audience gasping with pleasure, not only at his musical and artistic qualities, but also he was a very handsome fellow with this shock of waving red hair.
Paderewski's pianism was always controversial. Saint-Saëns hailed him as a genius, but others criticized him for being sensational, empty, vulgar, and violent.
Paderewski was the father of a very, very poor tradition, exaggerated. He was very affected in it. He was simply a marvelous personality. He was a great unforgettably marvelous personality, you know. That what made him a great speaker, made him even a politician, I mean, whatever he chose to be.
If Paderewski was the public's favourite concert artist, his fellow pianists would probably have chosen Joseph Hoffmann as theirs. Hoffmann was born in Poland in 1876 and was the most celebrated pupil of the Russian composer-pianist Anton Rubinstein. He made his US debut as a child in New York's Metropolitan Opera House, where his technical control combined with an extraordinary rhythmic and dynamic imagination to produce playing of elemental force and power.
He was an incredible pianist. All the great pianists that I heard during my time considered him the number one.
He was the greatest of all of them. Hoffmann was really absolutely unimaginably great as far as music goes, interpretation and technique. Technically, he had handled everything with not ease, but the most natural, most normal approach. And musically, I remember I heard him play, for instance, the Chopin sonata, the B-flat minor sonata. I played the first movement and I repeated the exposition. It was superbly played. He repeated it totally differently, but it was just as wonderful. So musically speaking, he had maybe the greatest knowledge and instinct of all the pianists. And technically, he pocketed everybody.
Our guest for this performance of the Telephone Hour is the distinguished pianist Joseph Hoffmann.
Suspicious of early recording techniques and engineers, Hoffmann toned down the subtleties of his performance when playing in the studio. This was his only filmed appearance.
He had everything. He had fantastic technique, beautiful sound. It was hot, cold at the same time. I believe it's from the 40s, this film. I think it's a period when he hardly performed anymore, having performed so much in the 20s, for example. And I think he was a heavy drinker by then already. And still, it is, I think, quite amazing, especially this Rachmaninoff prelude. Just the complete naturalness with which he plays, as though he would be really one body with the piano. You feel there's absolutely no battle with the piano whatsoever. Just this feeling of complete happiness with the instrument, which is absolutely unique, I think. to Hoffman. It seems everything came without any pain, and which at the end became his tragedy. He didn't have anything to hold on to. It probably destroyed him, this facility. Too much talent sometimes is dangerous.
Hoffman was a great admirer of his Russian colleague Sergei Rachmaninoff, and Rachmaninoff's influence on his contemporaries was prodigious. When he left Russia after the revolution in 1917, Rachmaninoff abandoned his vocation as a composer and became a formidable soloist instead. Joseph Hoffman described him as having arms of steel and a heart of gold, and the critic Harold Schoenberg wrote of him that so big were his musical thoughts, so aristocratic his instincts, that he ennobled whatever he played.
As most of the great pianists, he developed and he had a sound of his own, which was the most interesting, most penetrating, most colorful playing. And the way he played a recitative or a melody was absolutely unique. He, being a composer, of course, he played music as freely as he knew that music should be. His technique was formidable, and the polyphony, the bringing out inner voices, the coloring, and the little rubatos, the arpeggios, which were very individual, and certain individual motions, the way he produced those sounds were very, very characteristic of him. And I must say, luckily, he recorded all the concertos. And unluckily, many people don't listen to those. And many people interpret the Rachmaninoff concertos in a rather different way than he suggested how they should be. They usually sentimentalize it. And Rachmaninoff was never sentimental. He was very romantic, very emotional, but never, in bad taste, never excessive.
One of Rachmaninoff's greatest disciples was Benno Moiseiwitsch, who played with similar fiery impassivity. Rachmaninoff was reported to have said that the younger man played his works better than he did. Moiseiwitsch was born in Odessa, but came to live in London when he was 8 years old. As a teenager, he studied in Vienna with Leschetizky, who had also taught Paderewski and Artur Schnabel. Moiseiwitsch was his last great pupil.
So happened on my first visit to America, Rachmaninoff came to the concert and he was very gracious and complimentary and said particularly, "I thank you for playing my B minor prelude." I said, "It happens to be my favorite one." And he said, "Well, it's also my favorite one." And that created a link of friendship. I said, "Did you have a program when you composed the B minor prelude?" He said, "Yes," his bass voice. I said, "Good, I won the first round." I said, "I know your idea is not mine, but I know that mine is correct." He said, "All right, you tell me yours and I'll tell you mine." And we haggled for a while, and eventually I said, "Well, mine is a long story." He said, "If yours is a long story, it cannot be anything like mine because mine can be answered with one word." So despondently, I sat down in a chair and I said, well, to me it suggests the return, whereupon a long arm shot out. Stop! So I said, why, what have I done? I said, that's what it is. It's the return. It was an exile, and that's what Rachmaninoff was.
Perhaps the one pianist since Paderewski who truly captured the imagination of a huge public was Vladimir Horowitz. Horowitz's prodigious technique, his unique bell-like sound, and his personality, which was at once neurotic and yet profoundly musical, led some critics in the 1920s to hail him as the most extraordinary virtuoso they had ever seen.
Horowitz was the devil maker, who was really able to make the wizardry of the piano playing, especially coming to this kind of very sparkling, very, how shall I say, really wizardry, where when he played, for instance, his own transcriptions or Tchaikovsky concerto, the octaves of the Tchaikovsky concerto, nobody could do that like him. He was a musician as well, but I think the primary concern was for him the piano technique, which he was the king.
When he played at Carnegie Hall in 1920s and people were standing up to watch his octaves, actually, how does he do it? it wasn't so much the speed with which he played these octaves, but that he actually played them faster than he could, probably, and that was the exciting thing.
His hands when he played, that was the most beautiful, real pianist hands. It was like a beautiful racehorse with many tiny muscles, and so much reflected the fine technical qualities which he could perform on the piano.
For all his showmanship, Horowitz could be nervous of public performance, and once retired from the concert platform completely for 12 years.
And that pressure is terrific. And for pianists, I think it's a special problem because it's so antisocial, really. I mean, they have to sit in a room with this great machine, and they have got to, every day, prove that they're the master of it and not the other way around. And that can, I think, because it's almost a narcissistic process, complicate the psyche.
Horowitz was a phenomenon. I think he was extremely shrewd, and I think he was a very smart showman because he had, he knew how to coax his public.
In 1965, Horowitz announced that he would end his 12-year retirement and give an afternoon recital at Carnegie Hall. The tickets sold out within hours, though many expected he would ultimately cancel.
Everybody who was anybody in the music world had walked in. They saw me standing in the 56th Street entrance of Carnegie Hall, and it was Hurok, the late Saul Hurok, I think, who said to me, "What are you going to say when he doesn't show up? How are you going to tell the people this?" And I said to him, "I don't know." And then about 10 minutes later, Horowitz arrived. He'd been caught in his own traffic jam. And here is 2,700 odd people who've been sitting for an hour, waiting. And suddenly, the stage lights go on and the house lights go off. And physically, backstage, the tension was as if one was putting one's hand in an electric socket. And I brought him downstairs, and he got to the edge of the stage, and he turned around and faced me, just as I'm looking at you. And I thought, what do I do now? And I thought, oh, okay. So I turned him around and put my hand in the lower part of his back and pushed him out onto the stage. Well, the wave, the sheer sound wave of all those people getting up and greeting him was physical. It was, you really were just physically hit by it. And it got him for a moment. But then, immediately he was straight as a die, standing up, and he went to various sides of the hall to bow to the audience. And then he gestured toward the piano and started to sit down. Well, plunk! The silence was as loud as the applause had been a moment ago.
There is something about perfection and artistry which is contradictory, because artistry is not a mechanic thing. You cannot do something that now you, how shall I say, you are not a computer. And if you are too much concentrating on to be accurate, then you lose the essence of art, and art is feeling, to communicate feelings, to feel something and to communicate it. Mostly something about love, you know. Now, how can you feel love if you feel that you you are a racehorse, or you have to become a computer in a certain way. So it's something very contradictory.
The Hungarian gypsy pianist György Cifra had an instinctive musicianship that he first displayed as a 5-year-old, improvising at the piano for the audience at a Budapest circus. His very individual technique enabled him to play the most demanding works in the piano repertoire with apparent ease.
Vous avez beaucoup joué Liszt, puisque nous vous connaissons surtout comme interprète de Liszt.
Oui, quand je suis arrivé ici en France, j'ai commencé avec les œuvres Liszt. Alors, nous avons maintenant une fausse légende, si vous voulez, pianiste Cifra qui toujours joué Liszt, Liszt et Liszt et encore Liszt. Mais c'est pas vrai, bien entendu.
Since he was a gypsy and since he played a lot of Liszt, everybody said, oh, his Liszt is wonderful. I heard him do a Mozart concerto here in London. Superb, absolutely superb. And if I may say that, I really have the feeling that if somebody is really very good in any one style, they are very good in other styles too. We like to classify people, that is the romantic pianist, is the contemporary, but if you play Chopin very well, you play Bach very well too, and Bartók too.
Cifra ended his career as a Parisian celebrity, but before he emigrated to France, he was often to be found working as a jazz pianist in a Budapest bar.
We entered and I'd heard the piano playing, a fantastic pianist, and I said, who is the other pianist? Because I hear that forehand piano pieces they are playing. I said, there's no other pianist, it's just Cifra. And so I went and I have really seen the most incredible playing which I have ever seen. And so he was improvising on any tune you gave him as long as you wanted. And actually, he plays so fast that I couldn't know what is he doing.
None of us really want danger, and yet we are attracted by it. And the reason why one practices is to reduce the possibility of a disaster and to be as safe as possible. And yet then one realizes that being as safe as possible is often boring. And second thing, you'll never be completely safe because music is something that is alive, and life is never safe. Life is not about this.
In 1940, as London burned during the Blitz, the British pianist Myra Hess inaugurated a series of recitals in the National Gallery, which turned her into a popular heroine, despite the fact that, somewhat ironically, she specialized in the German classics.
She was deep, a deep musician, and at her best also a very exciting musician. Because there's that demonic side and the extreme side, and the classical veneer is precisely that. It's a veneer. The core is very hot indeed, and someone like Myra Hess could occasionally really zap into it. I think the first movement of the Appassionata does show the fury and the sense of drama that she had. You know, she takes her chances. It's extremely fast. And there are some technical things which are stunning.
There are many, many people who strive for a career as a concert pianist. The ones that succeed will accept the fact that they have fabulous technique and accept the fact that they can really, play the instrument. What makes people succeed is how they are able to capture the audience.
Rubinstein was born in Poland in 1886 and was still giving recitals almost 100 years later. A bon viveur, as much at home in the salon of the rich and famous as on the concert platform, Rubinstein felt part of a lost tradition, as he described it, not of romanticism but of extreme emotionalism. From the outset of his career, critics commented on the nobility and grandeur of his piano playing, as well as on the range of his repertoire, which stretched from Bach to Albéniz and de Falla. But it was his love of performing which made him uniquely popular with his public. Even in his 90th year, he could still declare before a concert that he was the luckiest man I know.
I believe very strongly that when we play to an audience, it is not just what they hear, but what emanates from us. That's what makes them come still so much to concerts, instead of listening quietly in their slippers to a gramophone performance. It makes a big difference, you see, because there is a personal touch, there is an antenna. I sometimes feel in the audience some person, might be anybody, an old man, a young girl, a woman, a man. It has nothing to do with sex or something like that. But I feel suddenly that there is a person who listens best to me, much better than the others, who takes everything in. And that helps me a lot, because I address myself to that person.
There was a certain steadfastness and a certain spine to his music making. I think that had to do with his person, with his personality, something very healthy about his music making. He also had very little patience for neurotic, the association between the neurotic and the artistic, which was very common, especially in the first half of the century. In other words, that artistry has something to do with something that is not common, which is true, but also not normal, which is not true.
I go to the concert with a feeling of little heart beating. Do I own the piece or not? I mean, what will happen? But this what will happen is all for the good, because that prompts that new approach, that same mystery about it as the public feels, you know, and that makes it alive,